Hey there, and welcome to episode 10 of the IT Guy Show. That's right, we are up in double digits now. We'll wait on the champagne until maybe episode like 25 or so, but I'm really excited you tuned in. I'm excited to have these back on a bi-weekly cadence here. So we've got some amazing topics coming up. I hope you tuned in a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about Lemire and convergence, and how I really, really wish I could take a tablet with me everywhere and then just plug it into a dock and have all the PC things as well. It was an awesome episode. Really appreciated Eric joining me. Now, this week, my next guest is Christian Hernandez. I know this guy pretty well, mostly because he and I worked for the same company for a while, and a lot of emails that were meant for Hernandez came to Hendrix. So we exchanged a lot of emails, not on purpose. But he and I are going to talk about GitOps and what that means if you're a Linux systems administrator, kind of cut through the hype. But we're going to talk about what is GitOps, and as I like to do as a marketing guy, we're going to try and cut through the hype, cut through all the jargon, and talk about what it really is. So with that said, let me bring on Christian. Hey, welcome to the IT Guy Show, my friend.
Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here for sure.
Yeah, this will be fun. When you pitched the idea, I was like, yes, we need to talk about that. We need to talk about it yesterday. So thank you for your patience. Has kind of got all the production and everything back up and running. But for those that don't know you, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing these days.
Yeah. So like Eric, as you said, my name is Christian Hernandez. I'm currently working at Acuity, doing community work, right? Community management work. But my background really is in operations, right? Systems administration, that sort of thing. I think that was part of the reason why I wanted to come on. Is like, well, like I'm a GitOps kind of DevOps kind of application delivery person now, but like my background is really like my heart is in like system administration. If you can believe it, I started off racking, Sun Solaris servers, making network cables, and then like now I'm doing, Kubernetes and declarative infrastructure with Argo CD. So that's I kind of ran the gamut from everything from like system administration, network administration, to now like cloud native technologies. Now it's like I recently wrote a book about Argo CD that just got published, and so I think this was a great opportunity for me to talk to like system administrators and like operations folks about GitOps and like how it fits into these sort of things. And for those of you that are watching this, right? So if you're not listening to this, you can see that there's guitars in my background there. So right, and I have some soccer scarves, so you can tell that in my off time I either watching soccer on TV, yelling at the TV, or playing guitar, being mad that way, right? So I have to get all this aggression out somehow, right? So that's kind of like what kind of me in a nutshell, and kind of what I've been up to.
So what you're saying is you'd rather automate your infrastructure so you have more time to play guitar and watch soccer than patching the systems at 2 a.m?
That's exactly it, right? I think what was there was a quote by, I think it was Bill Gates, or someone that's like, I always hire the lazy person because they want to get stuff done fast. And that's kind of like my motto. I was like, yeah, let's automate and get everything done fast. Get spend more time on guitar playing.
I actually told a manager that I was lazy, and he's like, "No, you're efficient." It's like, "No, you're giving me too much credit." It's like, "No, I really don't want to work on this 24/7. I'm lazy. I'd rather just work." So similarly to your background, I kind of started out as desktop support, moved into the server side, specialized in Linux around 2011, and have never looked back. I couldn't even spell Windows Server if I had to, and it's been fun to watch that progression. I can remember all the way back to 2006, 2007, seeing vMotion for the first time, the ability to be running a virtual machine, which was just a complete mind boggle to begin with, but to watch it running on one server and then over a few seconds start running on another server, and having a terminal window open and running a ping against that server and it never dropping a packet. I mean, we went from everything's mainframe to everything's standalone server to now we virtualize systems, and now we can move them everywhere we want to go. And then after that, it was, cloud and then containers. Then there was that year where everything was going blockchain. Don't forget the year that everything had to be green. All of our technology went green for a year, and then we stopped talking about that. So there's been all these different ideologies, all these different movements within IT over the last 20 some odd years, and it's been fun to watch. But there's been one thing that I want to see systems administrators adopt more, and so many of them are like, "Well, I'm not a developer." And that's this idea of GitOps. So for start, why don't you kind of help tear through the just kind of the bowl, to be honest, and explain what is GitOps?
Yeah, so I'm glad you put it that way, right? Because around I want to say 20, it has to be pre-pandemic, so about 2017-ish, 2018-ish. A few of us from the community, from the Argo community, from the Flux community. So this is like very vendor neutral, kind of community driven. It's like, hey, this term GitOps is coming around, and a lot of people are just kind of misusing it incorrectly, right? Also, we see people that are kind of just don't know what it is, right? It's like, okay, well, storing my infrastructure as code in Git, like that's been happening since forever, right? Like version controlling, either your HCLs or your Ansible playbooks, or in my case, way back in the day, I was using like Chef and Puppet, right? Like using that, those versioning those like has always been a
Before
thing,
that,
right? Like
it was your .conf files.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or like salt stack, right? Like
Mm.
it's always been that kind of infrastructure as code, type of thing. So what is this like GitOps thing? It's like, okay, well, like, a bunch of us in the community set out to actually create a school of principles, right? Like a suite of, let's just say, axioms, right? For lack of a better phrase, in which turned out to be the open GitOps principles, right? So which is just say like, how is a system, like how do I know if I'm running a system in a GitOps way, right? And
Mm.
so there's really 4 principles. If you go to opengitops.dev, they're listed there, right? And they're with links with further explanation. But like, there's really the 4 principles is really kind of simple, right? We have like declarative, right? Which just says like, a system managed by GitOps must have its desired state expressed declaratively, right? And so it's kind of like, okay, that's like, that makes sense. That's the infrastructure as code kind of thing. All right, that sort of makes sense. And then the second principle, that is version and immutable, right? And I think this is where um, uh, I want to draw kind of, or I want to kind of like double click on this, or put a big red laser pointer on this, is that because the principles state that a desired state is stored in a way that enforces immutability, versioning, and retains a complete version history. So notice how I did not say Git in any of that sentence. There's
Mhm.
no Git in anywhere in that in anywhere in the principles, or anywhere in the definition, and that is done on purpose, right? Because we actually in the community, the open GitOps community, when we're doing these principles, like, well, we don't really care where you store your declarations. It could be in Git, it can be in S3, right? It can be in SQLite, right? Like, as long as they're stored in a way that one, enforces immutability, and 2, has versioning and retains that complete version history,
Mm.
then that's really all that matters, right? That it's pulled automatically. So this is kind of where I draw the differences between kind of like an event-based kind of workflow. It's like, oh yeah, like I make a commit and it triggers this, or something happens and then something else triggers another thing, and we're like, well, actually, GitOps is more than just that, right? So GitOps is more than just, oh, in any time I make a change and it's it triggers something. It's like, well, what if that event fails? What if you're in a disconnected environment? What if, what if, right?
Mhm.
So, which leads to the excuse me, last principle is continuously reconciled, right? So
Mm.
it's like continuously looking for changes in the desired state. So I always try to equate the GitOps principles to like a thermostat, right? So like when I first got
Yes.
my, like straight out of college, first apartment, or your dorm room, right? Like you have like that wall mounted unit, AC wall mounted unit, right? Like you get warm, right? You stand up, right? You get warm. That's an event, right? Oh, I stand up, I go and I turn on the AC. AC is running a while. Maybe you're standing next to it and you're like, oh, you know what? I'm kind of cold right now. Let me stand up and turn it off. That's an event-based workflow, right? And it works. But GitOps wants to automate a lot of that. So it's really more like a thermostat. You set your desired state, right? You go and I want it, I want it at 72. And then once you set that, there's a system in place, right? The if anyone wants to look it up, it's the in control system, it's called a control closed loop, right? Where it monitors the ambient temperature. If it's too hot, it'll turn on the air. If it's too cold, it'll turn it off. And so GitOps is really just that, right? Kind of a continuous. Someone said someone said kind of like a cron job on steroids. And although I think I think that minimizes a little bit what GitOps is doing, I think it's a kind of like a really good. I think it's a really good kind of like a starting point where people kind of just see that analogy. Oh, in case an event doesn't happen, right? Because you'll still have event-based workflows, even in GitOps. But like in case an event doesn't happen or something happens, right? There's this controller that sits on the system that just basically runs that loop, constantly checks your source of truth, and constantly tries to make your desired state tries to make your running state what the desired state is.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's been a problem in the sysadmin community with engineers in particular. Just we get so hung up on the tools. I mean, like even the term GitOps, people get hung up on the Git. It's really just a desired state and putting checks and balances in place to ensure that you maintain that state. I mean, you talk about a manual window unit for AC, you know, and kids these days have it so easy. They just set their smart home thermostat on a schedule, and you know it's cooler at night, warmer during the day, that kind of thing. And I think IT operations has gone the same way. So you and I came up in kind of the same way up through the industry. So how did you go from being a Linux admin to being a GitOps evangelist? Now that we've kind of defined what GitOps is, how did that work for you?
Well, it's interesting, and it's actually I always joke, and I always said, I even said it to you, that I became kind of like a GitOps evangelist by accident, because on my on my team, we were kind of divvying up kind of responsibilities, right? I'm like, oh hey, I'm really really good at like IT operations, right? And so maybe I'll be like the Kubernetes operations guy, and I'll create content about operationalizing Kubernetes and blah blah blah. I was fairly new on the team, and someone else on my team actually raised their hand and wanted to be that guy, and I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, well, that's my forte. And I'm like, well, what else can I concentrate on? And I realized at the time, and I think my boss at the time was like, well, like just take care of whatever splat ops, right, or whatever ops that goes on a Kubernetes cluster. And so I think, okay, well, what's the how do people? And then I stepped back, right, and then I stepped back. I'm like, well, how do people really how would I really manage a Kubernetes cluster? And leveraging everything that Kubernetes gives you, right? So like, Kubernetes gives you immutable infrastructure, gives you, automatic orchestration of workloads, right? Like there's a lot of that stuff's taken care of for you. And so at that time, this new project was coming up called, Argo, the Argo project from Intuit. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I joined. And the first time I saw Argo, the first thing I thought was, this tool does everything that I wish I could do as a system administrator, right? So looking back at like my system administration days, a lot of stuff that we do now with Kubernetes, we do now with Argo, we do now with GitOps is things we're just trying to do all along, right? Let's like, okay, well, like I want to create, I want to create clusters, and those clusters, I want them to be very, very similar or almost identical, right? And so, you're creating VM images, you're creating, and I guess in some cases, making sure all the servers were like in the right patch set, and then the exact same version of, of whatever Linux you're deploying, and then, the same version of PHP or, whatever, right? Like whatever stack you want. And, I'm just trying to do all that. Doing that with at that time, with the technology at the time, was very, very difficult, right? Because you always get configuration drift. There's people making out of band changes. one server inevitably it's in a different patch set, right? Or you think it's the same patch set, but this one has a -1 to it and the other one has a -5 or whatever, right? You're like, oh, there's just like something, minuscule that is different that causes really a lot of headache, right? And so when I saw leveraging everything that Kubernetes gives you, but like in a uniform way, I thought, okay, like then I started applying kind of the same principles that I was trying to do a long time ago to using Argo CD, right? So using a GitOps tool, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I became by accident because it's like, well, there's some other guy that's more senior than me that's gonna do the Kubernetes admin kind of stuff. So like, what can I concentrate on? And I remember trying to deploy applications. I'm like, okay, well, how do I do this effectively now, leveraging all of that? So that's kind of how my journey is really like, okay, I'm a sysadmin. How do I apply those same things now with these newer tools, and how do I leverage these newer technologies to kind of do the things I've always trying to do, but technology's finally caught up.
Yeah, throughout my career, I've seen different administrators try and solve this different ways. Like, VM templates were a huge boon, but
Mhm.
then you always had to remember to keep your VM template up to date. And how many of us did that? I very rarely. Of course, the 6th or 7th time that I've tried to build a VM off of an outdated template, it's like, I really need to update this. Instead, I'm running the same 16 commands trying to update everything, or forgot to install that security tool that we just added last quarter, just different things. And it's been funny to watch that progression, because I went from that and uh, and storing .conf files and
Mhm.
Git, and at one point I thought I'd licked it by inserting symlinks from the operating system to a Git repository. That didn't work out very well with tools like
Yeah.
SE Linux, or just
Yeah.
apparently day-to-day operations.
Yeah.
And then into Puppet. Salt Stack was my first automation love, and then I came across Ansible and fell in love even more. And so nowadays I tell people that YAML is my preferred scripting language, just because anything that I need to do on the Linux system, I can do via an Ansible playbook. And yes, while it takes a lot of effort, how much effort does that save me down the road? Like, I'm in the process of rebuilding my home lab to support multiple different distributions, multiple different versions for my day job where I'm doing product marketing. And so being able to update packages as needed, being able to have an SSH key deployed alongside a virtual machine. Um, because as a systems administrator turned marketer, I spin up and tear down systems all day long. And it comes with it, with this effort comes a shift in how you think and the way you look at systems. Um, in fact, a lot of infrastructure as code experts in the field tell you that if you have to log into production with an account, you've failed, you've missed the mark. Um, and so, as you've made this accidental journey, uh, what are some of those mindset shifts that you've seen, that a systems administrator needs to undergo before they can really embrace this more ephemeral, more automated, more resilient approach to their infrastructure?
Yeah, I think the first mind shift, and I actually made the mind shift actually really early on, because I've always been, in my past as an administrator, right, on a small team, I was always looking at newer technologies, and it's like there has to be a better way of doing this, because like constant pain, right? It's like there just has to be.
Hmm.
So I did. So I think the first like mind shift that I think a lot of people went through. People still kind of go through this, is like the differences between like a VM and a container.
Mm.
I think that's a very important distinction, because like a lot of people say, oh yeah, a container is just like a small VM or a more portable VM. It's like, actually no, they're like, conceptually yes, but technically speaking, you can get a lot of trouble, because you're running multiple containers on a Linux host. They all share the same kernel, and you get a vulnerability in the kernel. Now they all have it, versus like in a VM, you're actually the tendency is actually you're fully virtualizing the kernel, so you're running separate kernels. So I think that's kind of like the first shift, I think, is like the containerization aspect of like you're instead of like spinning up entire VMs for an application, you're isolating the application process. I think
Mhm.
like, oh, okay, like this a lot more efficient use of resources.
Right.
With the trade off of obviously, you're not really, running the different kernels and blah blah blah, right? Like there's trade offs there. So,
Mhm.
but you get like kind of that density, right? I think another mind shift also, and I think you touched on it, but I think that's a very very important mind shift is like, okay, like with automation and things like that, if you are SSHing into a host to make changes and you're doing like SSH loops, right? You're doing it wrong, right? I think that's like another thing is kind of like, at that time, SSH. I love SSH by the way, but SSH, I've done like SSH like reverse tunnels and tunneling in here.
Oh
Like it's
gosh,
like
yeah.
it's like a really nice Swiss Army knife thing that does everything. But again, like everything looked like a nail, right, with SSH. So I was like doing SSH loops and things like that. So I think that's the first thing
SSH
is
and
like,
tmux.
yeah, tmux, SSH, yeah, like running commands and doing loops and and bash scripting. But I think the paradigm shift of like, no, like I'm managing it from like a central, these that it became less about they say pets versus cattle, right? Like it's like, no, like these are just machines that run workloads, right? Like I should be able to tear them down and spin them up fast and efficiently.
Mhm.
That's like another one. The one after that, actually, I think is a bigger chasm. It's like Kubernetes, and I'm a Kubernetes guy now, but like Kubernetes kind of says like, okay, I'm gonna take your SSH access away. Like not even you shouldn't SSH, like you can't even SSH.
Right.
Like so like get that's like a bigger chasm, right? Like that's like I remember early on in early on the Kubernetes days, that was like kind of one of the things when I was working with with various clients. They're like, okay, well, like let's set up SSH keys. I'm like, oh no, you don't understand. Where there is no SSHing, right? And that's like a big paradigm shift,
Mhm.
and a big kind of a bigger chasm, I think. And I think the last paradigm shift, and like I think it's a shorter jump, but it is a jump like going from like Kubernetes, right? Running kubectl, or using like the APIs or something, because those are still very imperative to running in a fully GitOps automated way, where
Mhm.
now not only do you know how to have SSH, I'm taking away kubectl away from you as well. So
Mm.
like you're adding these layer abstractions, right? Like you're further layering on. It's like not only do you not have console, you don't have SSH, you don't have kubectl anymore. Now like in a GitOps way is now you're treating Kubernetes clusters as cattle, and you're
Mm.
just kind of like you get this Kubernetes cluster, you point it to this Git repo, that cluster goes away. Okay, that's fine. I'll just spin up another one and point it to the same Git and repo, and Argo CD kind of takes it from there. So that's kind of like I don't want to say steps to GitOps, but those are kind of like some of the paradigm shifts that like I myself had to make. One and two, if those that are like moving towards more a GitOps friendly way or GitOps approach of managing systems, you need to start like thinking about those things that are like, okay, taking away access for something else, right? Something else or something better.
Is that one of the reasons why sysadmins and traditional Linux organizations, in your opinion, are so hesitant to adopt this kind of workflow? I mean, if you think about it, you kind of laughed when I was talking about SSH and tmux. Like I used to have a Bastion host that all it did was
Hmm.
basically a landing place for all my SSH sessions into my entire environment. Which, looking back, the security administrator inside my brain is saying, "Why did you do that, you dummy?"
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what it was. I had a VPN, a super slow connection, so just SSH into your Bastion host, and then you've got terminal sessions in tmux for everything else. But you go from that, and you go from control, and I've had root access for years, and then when root fell out of favor with sysadmins, then everything was in sudo, and and, and and so you go from that in a sense of control and a sense of having your fingers on every server. Of course, the pets analogy there. Um, to a lot of organizations now, like you said, don't even use kubectl, don't even do sudo DNF. Now whether you're talking about Linux or Kubernetes, I mean, I've seen a lot of systems administrators that are heavily invested in this space that can run a multi cluster Kubernetes enterprise, hundreds of nodes, dozens of clusters, with nothing more than VS Code and a YAML linter.
Yeah, I seen it. I see it as it's definitely a big rock to move, I guess, or a big a big cognitive load, right? Because I do remember I do remember going back, first adopting something like Chef, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
Chef Puppet, first adopting that. It's like, well, I don't want things to make changes without me, like without me doing them, right? It didn't feel like I was doing them. And that's kind of like the first paradigm shift, or the first struggle, right? Because a lot of the times, and this is even true today with running Kubernetes, but like even more so as like I'm gonna call it old school Linux admin, right? Like kind of what I was is um is like any change to the system, like I am responsible for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I have all these tools making changes, right, like you can't really blame computers. I guess with AI, maybe you can one day, but but now, right before that time, right, it's kind of like something happened, my phone is ringing, right, and so
Mm-hmm.
when I don't have that level of control, it is scary, right? Essentially, it's like I run one command and I'm touching 10,000 servers that I'm affecting hundreds of developers, and one missing semicolon, or like I guess in the case of YAML, one space too many, right? You have which you said, please, yes, do use a linter on VS Code. It just saves so much time. But that could produce a
Or
lot of phone
one
calls. Yeah.
one malformed for loop, and all of a sudden you spun up 1,000 EC2 instances on AWS.
Yeah, spot instances at that, because so then you try to delete them and they keep coming back. Is Yeah, so you should have a war story panel one day as a podcast. That would
That'd
be
be a lot of fun.
so yeah, no, it's I think that is uh that's a rock, right, that you kind of have to like boulder, that you have to like kind of move out of the way, and you have to do it, right, and you have to do it in order to manage tons of systems. It's like before maybe you can get away with it, but now everything's about scale and do more
Mm-hmm.
with less, that sort of thing. You have to adopt these tools, right, and like you said, I don't want to spend all my time managing systems, right? Like the system should be managed, and I can go ahead and go and work on other things.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, in the mid 2000s, 20 the mid 20 teens or so, I was one of 3 Linux systems administrators in a medium-sized business, and we maybe had 600 Linux servers if you counted dev, test, stage, production, DR.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, you figure that was 250 Linux servers each if you, split up the environment per administrator. Um, but now I see 1 or 2 Linux administrators per 1,000 servers or more. I've being in the enterprise vendor space for the last 6, 7 years. I talk to administrators that have tens of thousands of servers spread across the globe, and there might be 5 or 6 people. And so that scale is unbelievable. And I mean, just the times where you had to go and change one argument in one config file across 600 servers, that was a lousy day. Thank you, Tmux, and the team that brought it to us. But but I'm really thankful for that time, because it really gave me an appreciation for newer technologies, things like Kubernetes or infrastructure as code tools. Uh, but I don't know what I would do without that experience of having manually administrated hundreds of servers by hand. So what about the up and coming Linux systems administrator? What about the guy today, or gal, that that is in the space now, and they've got 10,000 nodes, and they have one other person on the team, and they're constantly fighting fires, and they hear what you're saying, Christian, and they're like, oh my gosh, I knew there was a better way. I didn't know what it was, but now this guy Christian is talking about it. What tools should they use to kind of get their feet wet?
Yeah, as a Linux system administrator, right? Like if we're talking about that, I think thinking about the GitOps principles abstractly, right? Like the way they're presented is kind of a good map, right? So these principles are and again, open GitOps.dev, you'll see what I'm talking about. But the those principles are written in a way that is that is open, right? So you don't have to it doesn't say anything about tooling, right? It just kind of just says about like practice, right? And so that's kind of
I
like
think
one.
I do
Mhm.
think that's important, that the
Yeah.
ideology and the technology are separate. As engineers, we get obsessed with our toolkits. So
Yes.
I think that's a huge boon to that ideology, is not having prescribed any tools. But go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and that's like actually the point, right? So then that way, if you're a Linux administrator, right, like whoever's listening is the Linux admin getting their feet wet, right, with administration, is like you have to look at tools that enable these things, right? So I think you mentioned Ansible, right? That's like I was a big Ansible user as well. Terraform is another one that you can use, or Open Tofu, whichever one, right? But
Mhm.
functionally they're the same idea, right? I think those two tools um, are are really like the foundational tooling that is needed in order to follow some of these principles, right? Some other things is that I think that so one for like in terms of tooling, or like one in terms of like philosophically, right? Like OpenGitOps.dev, I think just looking at those principles, reading through the glossary, notice we don't mention any tools. And then as far as tooling, if you're a Linux administrator, you're going to look at something like Ansible or Terraform. But also, you have to look at something. I think every Linux administrator should just learn to use Git. Um,
Yes.
and 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 that's not to say like I have any love affair with Git. It's just it seems to be the industry standard. Right, like I've used like SCCS, RCS, Subversion. Like I'm sure there's someone out there that there's a better tool other than Git. I probably agree with them. They're probably right. But you need to learn to speak kind of almost the same language as the people. Like if you are supporting developers, right? Like they're going to be using Git, right? And
For
you're going to
sure.
be hiring people, and they probably know Git, right? Like it just happens to be an industry de facto standard, right? It just happened to be that way. So I think, like in terms of tool adoption, I think at least um, you don't have to be a genius in Git, but you have to like know enough to be able to like roll forward, roll back,
Git
do a
reset's a
pull
good
request.
one
Yeah, get
if
get
you're
reset.
dangerous
Yes,
with Git.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, if you want to get like Git stash, or like just kind of you just start learning Git, because even if you're like storing like bash scripts like that, it's even useful for that, right? Like even if
Yep.
you're just even if you're just doing bash scripts, right? Or like me in my past, I did because I came from a Solaris background, I did a bunch of corn scripts. But that's the that's kind of the kind of like baseline kind of things to look into. People right away want us to start saying, oh, look in containers and Kubernetes. I'm like, well, not every workload requires Kubernetes, not every workload requires containers, but you can adopt some of these ideas and ideologies to better help your Linux administration. Like, and I say that as a Kubernetes guy, I say that as a containers guy, I say that as a GitOps, Argo CD guy. Like, not every workload requires it, right? Not everyone's going to
Mhm.
run, Kubernetes cluster. Like, that's just not gonna
Right.
not gonna happen.
Yes, yeah, Ansible, Git, Terraform. You mentioned Open Tofu, which is sort of an open source fork, if I remember
Or yeah,
correctly. Terraform changed the license, and so there was a fork of it. But they're still, to this day, more or less feature compatible. I think Open Tofu and Terraform are starting to diverge a little bit, but
yeah,
so if you hear Open Tofu out in the community, that it's an answer to Terraform licensing changes. Um, so um, so I know you're a big Kubernetes guy, and I imagine a lot of Linux systems administrators out there are also being handed Kubernetes clusters. which, funny enough, is kind of the same way I got into Linux administration. Was I had a stack of Active Directory enabled Windows systems, and if I never see another group policy object, I will die a happy man. But then someone was like, hey, we've got these half dozen servers. They don't have a web interface or a GUI or anything. Maybe you can figure out what to do with them. It's like, ooh, this is a lot more fun. But I mean, that's kind of how I started in my journey. But I moved to the vendor side before that happened with Kubernetes. It's like, hey, I know you've got this pile of Linux servers, but now we've got this weird Kubernetes thing. I don't know, Helm charts, all this kind of stuff. I don't know. Can you fix it? Can you do stuff with it? So I imagine there's a lot of administrators that find themselves in that position, because it seems like some organizations, anything that had a power cord on it ended up under the purview of the Linux systems administrator. Looking at you, storage, backups, networking, tape drives. It's like, this is IT gear. Here, admin, you go fix this. Okay. Anyway, maybe some old wounds to discuss at a future.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
But so I imagine that there's administrators out there that have been handed the keys to a Kubernetes cluster. So much like you're talking about getting into tools with GitOps, what about the Kubernetes? Because I know you're a big Kubernetes guy. So how would I, as former Linux systems administrator, dip my toes into Kubernetes?
Yeah, so I'll tell you my favorite tool, or my favorite thing to like mess around on Kubernetes is a tool called Kind, right? So it's Kind. It's an acronym, stands for Kubernetes in Docker. And basically is like, you take Docker desktop, right, or Podman desktop. I think OrbStack, I believe, works, and whichever one that SUSE created or Rancher created, I forget. They created one. I forget what it's called. There's
that one.
That one, yeah. That one also works. But anyway, basically you run Kind create cluster, and it creates a Kubernetes cluster inside of Docker, right? So this gets you kind of like local kind of setups where you can, you talk about home labs, you can spin up and test all kinds of various scenarios, right? And so the team behind Kind is actually uses Kind to run regression tests, right? To run tests. So anytime the actual Kubernetes actual engineers, it was born from inside of Google, but the Kind was basically, when they run their pipelines, right, when they create a new version of Kubernetes, they actually spin up a Kind cluster to run tests. So it's actually is pretty robust. There's other tools called there's a one called K3D as well. That one K3D. They wrote K3D because it's like a smaller footprint, because they don't use etcd, right? If you don't know what etcd is, the more of a reason for you to use Kind to kind of investigate what I'm giving out homework now. But I think getting your feet wet with like Kubernetes, starting off with Docker and then running Kind, so that way you can spin up and tear down Kubernetes clusters and run tests against that. I think becoming, and you said this before, but I think it's worth repeating, just becoming fluent in YAML. I think you're moving away from running bash scripts, and now you're kind of just like declaratively saying, here's a container image, run it on these group of clusters. Getting really familiar with YAML, I think is a good way to go if you want to start adopting and start getting really good with Kubernetes.
I think YAML gets a bad rap. I'm going to catch flack for this, but hey,
I'm there with you. I like
infuriating. Yes.
But
does it do a really good job? Is it readable? Yep.
Yes. I actually prefer it over JSON. I don't know. People think I'm crazy as well. Probably developers, because they're used to doing. I mean, it's so much easier to do a JSON payload and API call. I get it, but I'm not doing that, and the rest of us isn't doing that. YAML's so much easier to read, right? And now that we have linters on VS Code,
yes,
even if you're using Neo VM, there's plugins there's no more. I don't think there's any more excuses.
Yeah, I agree. So I want you're big on experimenting and trying things out in code. So I kind of want to wrap up today's conversation with something I've been wanting to experiment with. I want to call it a lightning round. I'm just going to hit you
Right.
with a few questions. You just answer, and we'll maybe I'll get some music underneath it or something in the future.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Or have
let's
like
try
a
this out.
gong and a timer or
Right,
something. Yeah.
right. Although sadly, I already asked you the first question. So the first question was YAML, friend or foe. I think you'd say friend. So
I
I
am a
only have
friend.
three
Yes.
questions in this lightning round. My bad. All right. So favorite Linux distro for getting work done?
Oh, that is Fedora. I've been a big Fedora user since Red Hat 9, so I've been at it for a while.
Fedora, love it. All right. CLI tool you can't live without.
CLI tool. Oh, that is hard. Vim VI.
Love it. A GUI that doesn't suck.
A GUI that doesn't suck. I have always liked GNOME.
Hmm.
I know I'm probably in the few, but I've always liked GNOME.
I don't know. I feel like GNOME is kind of the silent default. But maybe it's just the Plasma users that I know are very vocal about the fact that they use Plasma. But I think for the most part, no, GNOME just works. I mean, to be honest, when I came to Linux, I was coming off of Mac OS, and I wanted an experience similar to that. And with a few tweaks, GNOME looked and felt a lot like Mac OS. So usually when I do fire up a Linux desktop, that's what I'm running, and it's usually running Fedora as well. Um,
Yeah.
Gosh,
Yeah.
I've had a Linux desktop, laptop, some sort of user device running Fedora since 2021, somewhere in there.
Yeah. Somewhere around
Uh,
there. Yeah. Same here. Around college days, right? So like that I've always yeah. I've
I
distro
want to say
hopped,
I
but
also
I've always come back to Fedora. I mean, I like Arch too. Like I've used
I was
Arch
going to say,
in
yeah.
yeah. in my like so it's either Arch or Fedora. Right now I've just been on Fedora like unless like they take it away, I'm going to stick to it, but if they do take it away, Arch definitely is something that I'll
I
use.
definitely went through an Arch phase. Actually tried installing Arch on a MacBook Pro. Gosh, and my son's what, almost 9 now, so gosh, 11, 12 years ago. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Um, Although at the time I adopted Arch because of just how quickly all the software advanced. So a lot of the bugs I was seeing running Arch on a MacBook were fixed fairly quickly. But yeah, nowadays I found that I have other things I like to do other than sit in front of the computer, like sleep or spend time
Yeah.
with my family.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but yeah, so awesome. Well, anything you wanted to answer that we didn't cover today?
Yeah, actually no, I think it's been a good conversation. I think at least a good starting conversation. Anyone who's listening to this can has a lot to look at, but just know that the GitOps Argo guy started off as a Linux admin, started off racking servers, so it's not as scary as you think it is. It's just a lot of paradigm shifting. It's a
Yeah,
lot of
for sure.
inward looking. I think that's like the main thing I wanted to get across.
Well, if you've enjoyed listening to Christian today, please feel free to put that in the comments and give this episode a like. We'll put Christian's contact information in the show notes. But what I think I heard was him volunteering to come back in the future to talk more about this topic. Christian did mention this was an introduction, so
Yeah, that's right.
we'll have to dive in
Implicit,
deeper.
I guess. Implicit, yeah, implicit
Yes.
invite back. Yes.
Well, definitely appreciated getting to catch up. I think our pre-show was twice as long as usual. I don't think we did any volume check or anything other than just kind of listening in. But yeah, it was great catching up with you and back out on the conference circuit. So hopefully we run into each other here soon.
No, for sure, for sure. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for joining us. Really enjoyed this time and really excited to be publishing on a regular cadence again. Make sure you subscribe so you get notified every time I go live. I'll actually be trying to build some kind of a lab VM pipeline here in my home lab. just considering the number of distributions and versions that I'm currently creating content around. So looking to do that automatically using Ansible. So I'll probably live stream some of that process. You can see me bang my head against the keyboard when I forget a colon in YAML. But meantime, join us again in 2 weeks. I'll be hosting a conversation with Aaron Honeycutt. He is a big advocate and developer for Nix OS. So he was kind enough to answer the call when I said, okay, I've been hearing people talk about this Nix OS thing. What's it all about? Somebody come talk to me about it. So unlike a lot of our topics, I'm actually going to be sitting back and learning a lot about Nix OS along with all of you. So join me for that. I'm really looking forward to our next episode. Until then, y'all take care and we'll see you next time.